Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Recruit Military Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, male spouse employment, and much, much more. My name is Lucas Connolly, retired U.S. Army officer and former TAP program manager, here to share with you the ins and outs of making the move to the civilian world of employment. If you're in search of meaningful employment, well, you're in the right place. Please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. Okay, folks, let's roll. Are you thinking about leaving the military? Is your ETS date or retirement on the horizon? Well, if you answered yes, then you are watching the right show. Today, we're talking transitions with one of the foremost experts on the topic, so please don't touch that mouse. Today's guest is one of the nation's leading experts in career transition for veterans and public service officials, public service professionals alike. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel who spent 25 years in uniform and since then 24 years in the corporate world. Today, he's the president of Purepost, leads Lewis Advisors LLC, and continues to serve a number of veteran collaboratives around the country. He's an accomplished author whose work on transition topics can be found in magazines and bookstores nationwide. His website is an absolute treasure trove of resources for the transitioning service member. I've been through it. It's got some amazing content. All of it available to you free of charge. He coaches individuals on their transition efforts and advises employers on hiring programs designed to successfully assimilate military talent. He is just an amazing intellect with an obvious passion for giving back to his brothers and sisters in arms. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Matthew Lewis. Matt.
Hey, Lucas.
For today.
Good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, it's really great to have you on the show today. And for the folks out there who are watching us live, now that you know who we are, we'd like to know who you are. Who are you with? Who'd you serve with? Are you retired? Are you National Guard Reserve? Are you getting ready to transition? Is there some other status in there that I haven't heard yet? Please share. And if you've got questions, comments, concerns, or just want to say howdy, go ahead and jump in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. Matt, I had a great conversation with you the other day prior to the show. One of the things that we discussed is the very real gap between the military culture and the civilian culture. And I think a lot of transitioning service members underestimate that gap. They know it's out there, but they underestimate how wide the divide is between the civilian world and the military world. What do our service members need to know on how this culture gap can affect their transition?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. And to address this, and probably like most of the questions we'll go through today, I'm going to share some visuals. As a recovering consultant, I always have to have a visual backdrop. I'm a visual learner, and I just think it helps emphasize the point. So
by all means.
For that matter, I'm going to roll us through some slides here rather quickly. And by the way, all the slideware I'm pulling from, to Lucas's point, is available for free for everyone on my website. So civ-mil gap, it is the big chasm and widening chasm that you all are going to need to cross. And so let me illustrate exactly what it is. And by the way, Lucas talked about my passion. This is how I pivoted my passion in my career through my book efforts, through my work efforts, and we'll get into that later. But first, let's define exactly what it is. In my view, it's a widening divide between the nation and those who serve her, characterized by issues among multiple dimensions. You see them there, driven by root causes, incomplete poor transitions, and lack of support systems to enable that, and exacerbated, frankly, by opinions from both sides of the divide here. All of which drives a fundamental disconnect between what you as transitioning veterans expect of employers and vice versa. So let me illustrate what that means a little more detail. Some stats, some hard and cold facts. Fact of the matter is, vets make up less than half of the percentage of the U.S. population they did a generation ago, and that's going to decrease by a third by 2043. So it's going in the wrong direction, if you will. So lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of familiarity draws us further apart. Let's look at our elected leadership, also at an historic low. You know, some of these stats, less than 0.5% has served on active duty anytime post 9/11. 8% or less and decreasing are vets in the U.S. population, going to decrease by a third by 2043. Again, lack of understanding, lack of familiarity draws us further apart. We have a lot of vets coming out post OIF, OEF, but if you look at the veteran population overall, more than half of them are beyond retirement age. So those in the workforce those veterans in the workforce are becoming less and less prevalent. See the stat here, 90% drop of veterans in the workforce that were CEOs that had any military background, 90% drop. Wall Street Journal tells us this percentage is 2.6%. Even if you include all board members of the S&P 500, it's still less than 5%. So flip that around. If you're a vet coming out interviewing for a role at a certain level, there's better than a 95, if not 97% chance the person sitting across the table from you has no idea who you are, what you've done, what you can do. Again, lack of familiar understanding draws us further apart. Let's look simply at where we live. 2 heat maps on the right side of the slide, top being the density of the U.S. population, bottom being the density of the veteran population. Doesn't necessarily overlap, thus driving these statistics here. Veterans say the public doesn't understand the problems that the military faces, and the public tends to agree. Again, lack of familiarity, lack of understanding. So we got a veteran population coming out. It's growing to the tune of about 200K a year, but 70% of you are retiring short of retirement without a pension, and half of you say that you're not prepared for the transition. So net, what we've got are more veterans coming out whose elected leaders don't represent them. Corporate leaders don't include them. Population doesn't look like them or live nearby them. Employers don't understand them, and for which they're unprepared. Not exactly a recipe for success. Employers, while they're incentivized, there's tax benefits and other things to hire veterans, they typically don't have effective programs to hire, train, retain vets, and they face the challenge of doing so in the face of ever shrinking minority of their workforce, again, smaller percentage over time being represented, and in the face of constantly shrinking budgets. Again, lots of challenges here. So what's the net impact? More than half of y'all coming out are going to be unemployed on an average of 22 weeks. Almost 2/3 of your first jobs are not in your chosen career field, and you spend about 1.5 years in those. 50% of you, half of you, are still not in your preferred career field by your 6th post-military job. It's incredibly sustained rate of failure. And, it's an insult to injury. Suicide rates more than doubled the decade since 2006. So that, my friends, again, to describe it in total, is the challenge that you all face in leaving the service and joining the real world.
Wow. Okay. So that sounds like a pretty formidable gap to have to cross. And for some reason, I'm flashing back to a SOSR drill out in NTC. It was fire, smoke, and drive through the obstacle belt. Anybody that's been to the National Training Center knows how to cross a gap. How do our transitioning service members cross this gap?
Yeah. So in addressing that, again, I'm going to share some slideware here. Let me first address that or from kind of my own personal standpoint. So what to do? How do we close this thing? From my own standpoint, so what I'm doing on a personal basis, first book, and you'll hear me talk a bit more about it, Mission Transition, that addresses the military side of the gap. That helps it from that standpoint. But we need to educate our civilian leaders on how to do that. And I have my second book called Hiring Veterans coming out next year. That gets us part of the way there, but not totally. There's still a lack of what I'll say a warm handoff from your last duty station in the community into which you settle. So for that, there's a number of, parallel paths underway where I work with veteran collaboratives. We might talk more about that. I work at Purepost and other legislative initiatives to help bridge that final gap. So that aside, before we get into specifics, y'all got to realize, in spite of all of the bad news that defines that gap, what you're bringing with you is an incredible amount of value and talent. And IVMF, if you're not familiar with the good work going on up at Syracuse, you ought to check them out. They've done studies to document the business value of veterans. And these are all the characteristics that you bring with you. And all of which, by the way, enables you all, upon your transition, to get promoted faster, perform better, and easier to manage, or so say the HR leaders in organizations. Now, that's not to pose an us versus them conundrum here. That's not the attitude I want you to take into that. What I want you to understand and take away is that you're bringing a lot to the table. In fact, it's exactly what you supply is exactly what our civilian leaders, corporate leaders say that they need for workplace success. So know that you're bringing good things to the question. The key question here is how. How can you realize your full potential by avoiding false starts and suboptimal career choices? And that's exactly why I wrote this book. The goal of the book, my goal for all of you, is to help you find full employment upon transitioning from the service. One time, one go is the end goal here, because if we're successful in doing so, you will more than double your lifetime earnings, rates of retention, job satisfaction. Studies document that to a T. So it's incredibly important we avoid those false starts and the job hopping that we typically get. But what this requires is a lot of work up front to enable that. So those of you that are watching this perhaps a year or more in advance of your ETS, kudos. That'll give you plenty of time to get it done, but it's not easy. Just a few nuggets on the book. I wrote this to be very process-based, crawl, walk, run, step 1, 2, 3, focused on those strengths and teasing out those strengths that we just talked about, focusing on who before what. You first need to identify, do some self-reflection, self-study to identify who you are and how that translates into the real world. You must do that before you start to focus on the what, the specific jobs that you're going to be looking for. Unfortunately, a lot of the transition systems in the service don't do it in that style. Field manual-like, and key to this is the process. You hear me reflect on this process to answer the question how. This is it in a nugget, in a simple chart, if you will, flow chart. This is exactly how the book is organized, and this is exactly how you should work through it. First, again, focusing on who, understanding who you are, who you want to be. Then you get into addressing some decision points around your career preferences and your personal brand. Once you have that, or perhaps in parallel with that, you begin to document your network, prepare your resume, and only then do we get into engaging the network, applying for specific roles. You'll go through several of those in rounds, and then you ultimately decide on a role. You'll negotiate, you finalize your job, whatever it ultimately is. And then the real hard work begins of actually acclimating, assimilating into the culture of the organization, and, as I advocate for, reaching back and helping those behind you to do the same. The scope, as I call it, is focused on corporals to colonels, if you will, is kind of the catchphrase as to where it's at. I specify or bifurcate advice in the book in two different buckets. One focused on junior military professionals, the other on what I call career military professionals, where it's applicable. So that's, in short, my answer for the how.
Awesome. And there's a lot to unpack there. So if we just pick a few things here and dive in, there's no doubt, as you said, corporate America is looking for the talent, the experience, the skills that transitioning service members bring to the force. But in many respects, transition service members, myself included, we struggle to articulate clearly what our value is to an organization, how our skills, how our experiences translate from what we have done into what we can do. What advice do you give to service members about to get out as they try to translate that ORB or that ERB or that fit rep into something that they can market to the civilian hiring managers out there?
Yep. Again, I'm going to share a couple of slides here to address that one. So first, all about skills translation. And again, as we defined in the gap, and by the way, the longer that you stayed in, those of you that are, say, at year 19 or even beyond, what I found is the longer you're in, the more difficult crossing this gap is. It is an inherent part of who you are. You've likely spent the entirety of your adult life in this culture, and culture representing has its basis in behaviors or values rather that drive behaviors that result in the way that people act. And the culture in which you're going to enter is going to be way different, likely, unless you're going into a role as a defense contractor, perhaps in a nonprofit world. And so, skill translation, speaking and acting, behaving on a very different basis. It's incredible that you're able to do that, to communicate effectively with those organizations that you aspire to join. And so all of this is within the scope of preparing your resume, the written word, but it also needs to translate into the spoken word when you start to get into interviews and roles. Now, just a quick caveat to this next slide. Understand, and there's a decision tree you'll find in the book. The nugget here is more than half of you will end up in a corporate environment of some sort. And so I'll guide my commentary here based on that. And so what I'm going to give you here is a quick 5-minute MBA to help guide the translation that you're going to need to do. It all needs to be addressing these kinds of things. Here's the 5-minute MBA. A commercial, what we call for-profit business, it exists. It needs to have two things: a product or service of value and a paying customer. Every one of these organizations has an income statement that has the line items that represented there with corresponding goals and some examples that you see. Almost all commercial organizations are judged by their ability to produce a positive and gradually increasing net income. Right? To succeed, organizations either have to increase revenue, all right, by either increasing volume or price, or decreasing costs in any legal way that they can do so. Now, to the extent that you and your skills and what you've done can help an organization do any of those, you're a valuable asset to that organization. Now, as you sit and think through what you've done, especially if you're like I was, a trigger puller out in the service, some of those things may not instantaneously come to mind. But in the book, I work you through, again, go back to those IVMF skill sets that you bring, more of the soft skills, and that translates directly to how you can help move those needles. The point of all this is what goes on that resume and what comes out of your mouth in the interview must speak to those strengths that you have, soft, hard, or depending on what your background is, that's going to help that organization move the needle in any of those directions. Now, there's all kind of slideware here I can walk you through, and you'll see the same thing in the book about some examples of how to actually translate your terminology. I'm gonna spare you that detail. Just know that it's there. What I will give you is a bit of a hack. And you can follow what's in the book and in the slides and the courseware on my website. But the hack is my day-to-day business these days in Purepost. So let me just kind of throw out what Purepost offers you there. First, go on, and let me stop sharing as I talk to this. Go on to the website, purepost.co. Take you 15 minutes, complete a profile. What it's going to do is translate all of the work that you've done in the military and give you a graduate level Ivy League, I'll call it online profile. You can think of it as a resume. You can certainly download it and print it out as a resume. You can use it as an electronic profile to apply anywhere you like, all for free for life. Once your profile is complete, you will have access to our Knowledge Center. Think of it as an individualized, personalized career development program, all for free for life. And you're instantaneously matched to any of 4 million jobs on a daily basis coming through the National Labor Exchange based on your underlying competencies and skills, all for free for life. This is a new technology, a new platform. I'm proud to be working with the team that's bringing this to market. So again, like everything else on my website, go out there, complete it. It's yours for free.
That's fantastic. And I have gone through some of the materials that are out there, and I took a look at Purepost just last night. Some excellent resources out there, and really great to see that someone's giving back in this way, because there's no such thing as too many resources and too much free advice when it comes to transitioning out of the service. You touched on something earlier when you were talking about translating skills, and then you talked about marketing yourself as a commodity. We hear a lot about networking. You got to be networking. You got to get out there and you got to network. Just firing off resumes and carpet bombing the marketplace with you, it doesn't work. So you got to be networking. One of the components of networking that I think we gloss over, that many folks kind of hand wave and they don't really dive into, is personal branding. What do our transitioning service members need to understand about personal branding and how to market themselves?
Yeah. And branding's a critical part of the process here, just to highlight where it is in the flow chart. Once you understand who you are and who you want to be, You need to get right into that next. And that drives into, I mentioned, kind of a decision tree around what a career is and career preferences, but hand in hand with that is your personal brand. And you would do that in parallel with documenting your network, preparing your resume before you reach out and start engaging your network and applying and interviewing for roles. So just so where it is there. So let me talk personal brand. Let's kind of define what that is and talk about some of its components. And then with that understanding, we can talk just a minute about the how. So when you think about your personal brand, there's really two dimensions to it. There's the outside in portion, which is the way the world sees you. You know, what are you known for? Whatever that is. But then there's the way that you view yourself and look at the world. You know, what it is within you or your background that makes you unique. All right. And as we approach this branding, this personal branding and elevator statements, that's the culmination of it. You need to leverage that inside out dimension to influence the outside in. We'll talk in next slide about attributes and brand statement components and characteristics. A key point I want to make here is in composing this branding statement. Again, you can use the euphemism, elevator speech. This is new, friends. This is challenging. You likely haven't done it. And frankly, the way in which it needs to be done may come across to you as being off-putting. The key change here, we are all from the military, given the selfless service aspect of our culture, thought to talk, think, and speak in third person, especially when it comes to describing any sort of successes. You know, we did this, my team did this. Well, when it comes to resumes, interviews, organizations are hiring you. They're not hiring your team. They want to hear about you and what activities, experiences you did, what actions you took to move the needle, and how does that apply to moving the needle in their space. So again, practice, practice, practice. Don't do it in front of a mirror. Do it with a fellow civilian or a spouse, preferably someone that works in that industry or that industry segment, or even better, within that organization. That'll be able to give you some direct feedback about how you need to tweak some of the verbiage that you're using. Anyway, let's get into it. So personal brand, what are the attributes of it? There's who you are. And I walk you through, again, in the book, help you uncover, tease out what your strengths are. Also includes value, skills, and how you leverage those. How you present yourself, all right? Incredibly valuable. And even in this age of Zoom and Teams and everything else that we're on, all right? So showing up and playing the part is still important. And this plays as well in terms of how you communicate, which includes the words that you use, how you use those words, and nonverbal cues. Now, critical thing to recognize here, again, well documented in studies over the years, there's various aspects of communication. And you might think, well, it's more important the words that I use or how I use those words. The fact of the matter is, visual aspects, how you look, how you appear and come across to the audience, drives 55% of the impact of the message that you're trying to drive. The actual words that you use only covers about 7%. How you use those words has 38% of the impact. So first time people see this, if they haven't seen it before, it kind of blows the mind. So again, the reason why I'm a visual learner and why I use slides here. Brand statement components. These are the pieces that represent that elevator speech. It involves your primary strengths or skills. You need to identify what those are. You need to both document and translate your past and current job descriptions and have a go at how that's going to work, what impact that's going to have in your future. A brief description of your future goals. Again, what makes you unique, that inside out aspect. And then you want to boil it down to a statement. Again, call it an elevator speech, call it what you will. It needs to be concise. All right. No more than 60 seconds. Dispense with all of the 3-letter acronyms, all of the military gibberish that you've been using, most of your adult life. And again, this is going to require practice and rehearsal. Use strong verbs and use something that describes you and only you. Don't throw out, cyber seems like a interesting field these days. I'm going to go do that. It needs to be honest and genuine and speaks to the audience. You got to tailor it. You could be talking to an HR person. You could be talking to a finance person. You'd be talking to a line leader. Whoever that is, you want to tailor it to that. Now, the book goes through all sorts of examples. I'll just throw 4 up here real quickly just to give you a sense of how to do that elevator speech, how to translate what you've done in very short order. You can see there's 3-4 sentences max that would comprise this branding statement. Once you have this, then it becomes the how. How do you relate this? And the book gets into social media and what have you. But that's the way in which you would manifest this personal branding to the outside world. But you need to go through this exercise before you start engaging with the social media. Again,
so now would you say that the elevator speech, that there's room for this same content, this same brand statement, this same verbiage in your resume, in your LinkedIn profile, in whatever other social media platforms you're using?
Absolutely. And again, that's why it's placed where it is in the flow chart. You need to have that nailed down before you sit down to write your resume or speak whatever it is you're going to speak in the interview that you're conducting.
Awesome. Sliding on to workplace culture. You mentioned that earlier. Anyone who's served in uniform can tell you that there's a huge difference between military and civilian workplace culture. The language we use, sometimes colorful, the way that we interact, the titles we use, our heroes, the manner in which we get things done, our hierarchical structure, all different, very different from your average civilian workplace. What deliberate steps would you recommend for transitioning service members leaving the service and about to assimilate to that new civilian workplace culture?
And again, let me defer to a couple slides here. So culture, friends, you may not have understood it to be what it is, but this is one of the more difficult challenges you're going to face. And at the end of the day, will have the most impact about your ability to succeed and will determine the ultimate tenure you have at your organization. So, but first, let's define what culture is. What the hell are we talking about? If you haven't heard of this before. So it all starts with values. Values form the basis for behavior, and it's the culture of the business is based on the collective behavior of individuals within those organizations. So let's look first at where you're coming from. And I just added Space Force's values there that they just published within the past 12 months or so. So depending on what service you're coming from, we can kind of boil those down to what I'll characterize as a set of military values. And you can see them there: honor, integrity, commitment, courage, etc. The exercise you need to go through, and this frankly is one of the hardest things to put a finger on when you're coming out of the service. You need to get a grip on what are your new organization's values. Now, you'll see something, assuming they have a website, which most everyone does these days, they'll likely have something posted out there. I would encourage you to dig beyond or underneath what's posted on the website, because what goes on in a day-to-day basis within that organization may or may not represent what is written on their website. And to do that, Lucas, I'll go back to your words around the importance of networking. And I spent 2 chapters on that in the book. And that's the key to getting at uncovering this. But to do so is not easy. And you need to know someone pretty well to ask the questions whose answers will betray exactly what the organization's values are behind the scenes and how they manifest themselves in behavior on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you got to try to find an honest broker.
That's right.
You're going to get from, naturally, as you would assume, from the senior members of the organization, you're going to get the party line, the talking points, the mission statements, the value statements, the PR. If you can get connected with somebody who's in the organization, possibly a veteran, you might find an honest broker who can peel back the onion and show you the ins and outs of that workplace culture before you get there. Try before you buy, so to speak.
Exactly right. The importance of tribe. I'll circle back and talk about tribe in a bit. But here's I think the other big nugget, but besides understanding what culture is, in teasing it out and defining it along its multiple dimensions. Now, you'll see this chart in the book as well. What I've tried to do is break down culture. What are the various aspects, I call them dimensions, that represent culture, both in the military and the type of organization you're going to join? And so I've tried to define this, and you can see the various dimensions on the left. One of the key things folks struggle with is finding their new purpose. The different way in which leadership is approached within an organization, how organizations are structured. I can go on and on. And in the book and my courses go into all of this detail. What I've tried to do here is contrast, I'm stereotyping, but, the culture within military organizations. And you can read down and see how I've documented that. But what's interesting is how that contrasts or not with various types of civilian organizations. And what we tend to find, larger, I'll say, what tend to be more bureaucratic corporate civilian organizations tend to have corporate cultures whose dimensions are a bit different from those in the military. And you can kind of read down the list and see where there's a difference between the military organizations column and the one next to it. Interestingly, the third column over, which represents smaller, more entrepreneurial civilian organizations, they tend to have behaviors and cultures along these various dimensions that more closely matches what you've grown up and lived with in the military. Now, that's not to say that because of that, you need to target smaller entrepreneurial organizations. The point of this is to go in eyes wide open with whatever organization that you end up, understanding what those differences are, what those gaps are, and what you as an individual are going to need to do to, again, cross that chasm. And again, I won't belabor the detail, but there's a story to be told on every single one of the rows, line items in this chart. Again, ideally, before you go in, you're able to go in and populate that last column here, which is, how do those behaviors manifest themselves as a cultural dimension on a day-to-day basis in that new organization you want to join? Again, very difficult to uncover. But to Lucas's point, if you can leverage your tribe and engage with perhaps some veteran peers to help you uncover this, you're going to be much better situated than those that don't coming in. Again, incredibly important, but this is really the nugget in the exercise that y'all need to undertake to ensure this one doesn't trip you up. If you don't,
And I'll just say one thing from my experience is this is not understanding these cultural differences, understanding how they can impact your work. This is not just an academic exercise. You can very quickly run afoul of the HR department at your new job because you handled something or addressed an issue the way that you've been comfortable addressing an issue for the previous 20 years, only to find that your approach is 180 degrees out from what that organization expects you to do when you address a situation. In the military, it's handle it at the lowest level. In some civilian cultures, it's immediately go to management, immediately involve HR. In the military, it's chain of command, right? If you have an issue, bring it to me. I'll bring it to my boss. Where in some civilian work cultures, it's perfectly normal to jump 7 layers and mention it to the CFO in the break room and then have it come right back. And, if that's the culture of that organization, don't take it personal. It's just the way the organization works.
Yeah. Or the other point of organizational structure, again, military is based on a hierarchy. Most civilian organizations are based on a matrix. So you may have multiple bosses and reporting on multiple lines, which can be quite confusing for those. The point of all of it is if you don't get a beat on that before you enter the organization, you're going to experiencing change along all of those dimensions simultaneously. And you've heard the horror stories of people getting out and their heads spin because they've got all this change hitting them all at the same time. You want to try to avoid that if you can.
No, absolutely. All great material. I wish we had a half an hour or another hour to get through this. But as we dial in on the tail end of the episode, just one last question, the same question I ask of absolutely every guest I have. If you had just one piece of advice, imagine yourself in an elevator, giving your own little elevator pitch to a transitioning service member. You've got 30 seconds. You can give him or her one piece of advice before those doors slide open and you step off. What would it be, Matt?
Yeah. And again, I'll broaden that to be 2 points. And let me preface the first one. It comes down to finding your purpose and finding your tribe. And so for purpose, let me add the caveat there, and I'm going to hold up a book here if you see it. It's Life's Great Question by Tom Rath. The great question is, what is the most meaningful contribution that you can make as you sit and think about, what is it that you bring to this next chapter in your life. In doing so, you need to accept the premise that what is contribution? And Tom argues that contribution is the sum of what grows when you're gone. And so the key to contribution is investing more time where your talents will yield the greatest results for others. So in this sense, this may be helpful, again, kind of borrowing our selfless service cultural dynamic and how that pivots to the real world. Invest more time where your talents will yield the greatest results for others. Now, where I've teased this out, why I'm putting up this slide, this is where this is addressed in the flow chart and then the book. It starts with who. You understand who you are, who you want to be, and answering that life's great question is part of that. And the self-discovery sequence are the exercises in the book that get at that. I won't belabor it, but please do them as part of those first couple chapters. The second point I want to make is around finding your tribe and leveraging that tribe. You understand both in the process of getting out and when you ultimately end up in that organization, you want to network and leverage your tribe, your fellow vets in doing so. So start with regular discussions with peers. I'm kind of referring to the chart on the right. You're a new hire, you're a veteran. Engage with mentors and affinity group members that are fellow vets. They can help connect you with members of the balance of the employee population that understand who vets are, and then they in turn to folks in the balance of the organization. So over time, this will help increase your network and enable you to assimilate, to become one, if you will, with the culture of that organization. Okay, so I'll leave it at that and answer to your question.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Matt, before we get going, tell us what you've got on the horizon for Purepost, for your publications. What's out there in the future in 2023 for you?
Sure. Well, Purepost, we just continue to scale. And we're serving both military and civilian organizations. West Point's Association of Graduates is a client. Philips USA is a client. And we just continue to grow and grow. So my second book's coming out next year, titled Hiring Veterans. I'll be creating workbooks for each of those to make it even more easier to digest. That's on the horizon. And then oddly enough, I felt the process underlying mission transition was universally applicable, and that's since been proven because professors from the UK have reached out, and I'm working with them to create a UK version of mission transition as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Matt, hey, I really want to thank you for being on the show. A lot to unpack. I personally am going to go back and rewatch this because there's a lot of great stuff in there. For those of you who want to hear more of the great materials, of the amazing lessons to be learned, of the advice, the tips, the techniques, the step-by-step how to have a successful transition, head over to Matt's website, and you're going to find some amazing content, again, all free of charge. And if you haven't already done so, quick plug for my company. I love working for RecruitMilitary, so I can't help but wave our flag for just a second. If you haven't already done so, do yourself a salad and use the link, rmvets.com/live. That'll take you to our website where you'll find over 400,000 job opportunities with more than 6,000 employers around the world, around the country, and just around the corner. The opportunities are there. Come on down, check us out. We're sure you're going to find something that's going to fit your transition goals. On behalf of RecruitMilitary and the folks that joined us today, thank you very much, Matt, for being here on the show. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure, Lucas. Anytime. Take care, everybody.
And everybody out there, thanks for joining in. Be sure to tune in next week when Todd Nelson from Edward Jones Investments talks to us about how to be prepared for your transition from a financial perspective. I don't think you're going to want to miss that. This has been Lucas Connolly for RecruitMilitary Live. Until next week, good luck and Godspeed.